Anna Olson is a pastry chef who believes you can never have too much of a good thing. One of Anna's favorite things to do is bake when she's not taping, writing, or creating a new show or something, or a new white chocolate trifle fancy cookie, butterless tart, or perfect pie. She is the host of a television show on Food Network called Fresh with Anna Olson. Her new cookbook is filled with timeless recipes. It's called Back to Baking. It is my pleasure to welcome Anna Olson back to Studio 4 to tell us more.
It's a pleasure to be back here, Fanny.
So you could have been the president because you're born in Georgia, or you could have been the prime minister or a political science professor, but instead you said, no, I want to bake.
Yes, I love that balance of precision in the baking world, but I like to share that there's a lot of flexibility and creativity too. And it's just satisfying. You're cooking to share.
Who taught you how?
My grandmother was my inspiration to start baking. She made dessert for her family every single night of the week. And honestly, I never saw leftovers, so I don't know where they went to or if there were any. I suppose my grandfather and uncle had a solid appetite. But she was the one who took such pride in her cooking that it's that sense of pride and caring in not just the end result, but the task itself that really caught on.
I was thinking about my grandfather the other day, and he always said, not what's for dinner, what's for dessert.
Yep, and I know quite a few people who have dessert first because they don't want to miss it or find themselves too full. So
perhaps, but you know, everybody's on a diet these days, or watching their weight, or going gluten-free, or eliminating some type of sugar from their diet. So baking has changed a little bit.
It has. I have found
bit.
over the last 5 to 6 years, I have been asked time and time again for baking recipes. People sort of lost touch with baking because of a dairy allergy or intolerance or an egg allergy, or they're celiac, so they can't have wheat or anything with wheat gluten in it. And so as part of my recipe repertoire, as it expanded and is always changing and growing, every time I make even same old chocolate chip cookies, I'm always looking at them going, well, how can I make it better? How can I make it different? But I've also created recipes for those with the allergies and intolerances, so you can bake for everyone. At holiday time, that's important.
So something that is flourless and gluten-free and really chocolatey?
And still delicious. That's the key. Just because it's free of one ingredient doesn't mean it's free of taste and satisfaction.
Well, you also have tips in Back to Baking on how to melt chocolate, and that sounds like a simple thing to do, but is there an Anna Olson trick?
Well, chocolate's a fragile ingredient, and the darker the chocolate, the more stable it is, but it just takes a gentle hand. Most of baking just takes that gentle hand. So I like to put it in a metal bowl over a pot of barely simmering water, and it's just the steam that actually slowly melts the chocolate, and then it's easy to work with.
And then it's easy to work with, but what if you just put it on the burner? I mean, in the pan, on the burner.
It'll scorch, because chocolate's made up of 2 parts, and even though the cocoa solids and cocoa butter grow together in nature, in the cocoa bean, they don't actually like to hang out together in the form we created in. So they're gonna try and separate wherever possible. So the gentle heat keeps them together.
Okay, so when something sugars, like you make fudge, and it's not creamy, it's sugary, or you make, do you remember divinity?
Yes.
Did you ever have divinity?
Well, I've adapted a recipe in the book. They're called D'Artagnan squares because they taste exactly like 3 Musketeers bars. And that's essentially a chocolate divinity candy. And yes, I've had that happen where it crystallizes. And it's supposed to be fluffy and light, but all of a sudden it's crunchy and dense.
Yeah, it tastes like a bad meringue.
Yeah, that's a sign that your sugar has crystallized. Sugar wants to go back to its crystallized state. So by introducing an acidity or sugar in its fluid form, corn syrup, or even maple syrup or honey will help as the sugar's boiling, keep it nice and fluid.
Okay. Brown sugar, white sugar, any kind of sugar, doesn't matter?
No, doesn't matter.
Okay. Pie crust. We'll get to Christmas cookies, I promise. But and to this trifle. Don't trifle with that trifle.
No, we're not.
It is a trifle, right?
Yes.
Okay. But pie crust tricks. I had the Cook's Illustrated editor here, and he said the secret to good pie crust is vodka in the pie crust.
And I've tried his trick, and I think it's a great way to get vodka in the kitchen. Maybe that's what's going to get you through the holiday season.
Maybe it is.
It didn't really work for me.
Really?
I did a lot of research, and I looked to the way they make a plain pie pastry, a butter pie pastry in Europe, particularly France, and they're kind of known for those buttery, flaky pastries.
You noticed.
You know what they do? They relax. We have so many negatives in our pie crust. Don't let the butter warm up. Don't add too much water. Don't overwork the dough, that we don't make the pie crust itself.
Right.
The French relax. They work with room temperature butter, and they just mix it until it comes together, and you relax about it. So I find pulling your butter from the fridge 30 minutes before you make the pie crust means the dough comes together faster and easier, and also do the same thing when you're rolling the pie crust. People complain, well, I roll my pie crust and it cracks. Well, if you pull it right from the fridge, yes, you've got ice cold butter.
Right.
Ice cold butter spread on your toast cracks. So the same applies. So pull your pie dough out 30 minutes before you plan on rolling it. You'll find it rolls easier, faster, and that way you're not overworking your dough.
Pie making is not my forte, but I can make cream cheese pie pastry.
Oh, that's a good
Because
pastry.
when you have the cream cheese in, it stretches.
Yes, it makes it easier to roll. And it tends to have, if you notice the recipe, actually a higher proportion of fat, because you've usually got a combination of cream cheese and butter in there.
I bet it does, but we make our Christmas thing is mushroom tarts and a cream cheese pastry. Now, they are good. I bet they're fattening, but who cares? It's the holidays.
And it's about moderation.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't have to have 10 tarts, you can have 2.
But that's the difference. When you're making something from scratch, you know what you're putting in there, and it's also satisfying, so you're not looking for replacements or substitutions. So, sometimes you'll buy one of these fat-free cookies and they'll have half the fat, but then you'll eat 4 times the number of cookies to get fulfilled.
But do you measure everything? Are you a precise pastry chef?
I am, because baking requires that respect for how the ingredients are interacting.
Right.
But you do need that precision.
So the baking soda, the baking powder. I know, well, in Italy, if you're making a pasta, you throw some flour and some egg and just work with it. But if you're making, not necessarily a trifle, but something that has to rise, like a cake.
You need, if you're measuring baking powder, baking soda, or yeast, you do want those precise measurements.
You had a carrot cake in back to baking for a wedding, an autumn wedding. How lovely.
And it's inspired actually by my own wedding cake, because I had a fall wedding and a spice cake with a cream cheese frosting. And, I haven't made it since until the book, and I decided, you know what, I really appreciated it. And wedding cakes now are not just about the outside. You've got to have something that's going to be a crowd pleaser.
I had a red velvet. It was great. Marriage didn't last, but the cake was good. Don't you know? So trifles. Keys to trifles. What kind is this trifle?
This is an apple crisp bourbon cream trifle. So what I'm doing, a trifle is a festive dessert. It's a practical dessert for holiday time because it feeds a crowd, but it should be visually appealing. You always build a trifle in a beautiful glass bowl.
Right.
So you can show off the layers. But instead of making a sponge cake or buying a sponge cake and sort of working with that as a base, I thought one time I was making an apple crisp, and when I had it set in the fridge, it was rather firm. And I discovered it's easy to scoop and build these layers. And so you have all the things you love in an approachable dessert. The oat cinnamon topping, the cooked apples, but by making a simple custard and spiking it with a little bourbon. Of course,
where the bourbon
optional.
is, in the custard.
Yes, and then you layer that and top it with the whipped cream. Now you've got a real Canadian trifle.
No kidding. Or a little southern trifle with the bourbon.
Yeah, with the splash of bourbon in there. Yes.
Because you're Georgia born. Were you there long?
No. I didn't spend a lot of time there, but I went back down to the States to study the culinary arts and work for a while before I made way.
And then you married a Canadian, or how did it all come together?
I did, a prairie boy from Saskatchewan.
But he's a chef.
Yes, and we worked together in Niagara. So
at In on the 20, I think, as I recall.
Yeah.
Is he still chefing?
He is. He's a chef professor at a culinary school, and so we cook together, work together. We're cooperative cooks. We're not conflictual
I
cooks.
see. And, you can tell a lot about a relationship by what goes on in the kitchen.
Yeah, that's true.
Can't you?
Yes.
Does he cook dinner, you cook dinner, do you care?
On weekends, we cook together. That's sort of our weekend activity, and go to the farmer's market and such. But, like most households, whoever gets home first cooks dinner. So, yeah.
Great. Now, what about a souffle? If you want to make a raspberry souffle or a chocolate souffle or a chocolate and raspberry souffle, the tricks.
Oh, it's timing, but you can't make a souffle ahead of time. You do have to make it right before you serve
Right.
it. But you can get all those components ready. My favorite souffle I make around holiday time is a Bailey's.
Bailey's souffle,
Bailey's
yum.
chocolate souffle. So I make the chocolate base, which you can have that aside. I have my egg whites ready so that by the time we're sitting down for the entree, I whip the egg whites, combine it, and then
Okay,
bake
because
it.
that's an easy part, right? And
yeah.
then you serve them in the little ramekins
And you
a
serve
little
them
whipped
right
cream.
out of the
Is there a
oven.
secret to whipping cream? That looks so perfect.
Well, I like to whip it by hand if it's less than a cup, just because it's easy to do instead of pulling
Right.
out the mixer or the electric beaters. But to whip cream ahead of time and stabilize it,
Yeah.
a great little addition is a tablespoon of instant skim milk powder. Add that any point for every 1 cup of whipping cream. Add that any point when you're whipping, and that actually holds the beautiful peaks and dollops. You can whip your whipped cream a full day ahead, and it won't separate, it won't collapse, it'll
Really?
hold
So
every
skim
swirl and
milk
dollop.
powder.
Yeah, just a
And you put a
tablespoon for
little
every cup.
vanilla, a little sugar.
Yeah, to
just
sweeten it
leave
up.
it as it is.
Yeah.
How yum! Butterless butter tarts. That's probably a bit of a sacrilege, isn't it?
Well, but if you have an egg allergy or you're lactose intolerant, you can't have a butter tart. And I wanted to work something up. And my Michael, my husband, was a victim as often as he was a taste tester. And I knew I had hit a home run when I had fed him this butterless, eggless butter tart, and he didn't even know.
See?
It still had the beautiful drip and the syrup and the pull and the texture and the tender crust.
Okay, and recipe in here, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Along with the butter-laden version, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
The quaint gingerbread house, too.
Yes.
What's the keys to making gingerbread sides or gingerbread roofs or
Well,
whatever
you
to
can-
making gingerbread?
You can go online and find any number of templates that you trace, but what I simply used was, believe it or not, a simple loaf pan. So I traced the long side of the loaf pan to make the long walls. I traced the short side to make the short walls.
Right.
And then using that short side, I just drew a triangle over it. And now you've got, and then I used the bottom becomes the roof. And because the loaf pan, of course, all
Right.
fits together, the gingerbread house fits together.
Hey, and how do you fit it together? With frosting, with what?
You use what's called royal icing, and it's simply meringue powder or egg whites with icing sugar whipped together. And what I like to do is draw my designs on the flat pieces while they're not assembled first, let those dry,
Right.
and then use that same royal icing to
Okay,
pipe.
and the drizzle
like
roof
cement.
is
I just do a little piping and then a dusting of icing sugar.
okay, and you know those little spritz cookies that you spritz out? And sometimes you make a Christmas tree, it doesn't quite look like a Christmas tree. Should you cool that dough or what's the deal?
No, actually, you want to warm it up.
Warm it up,
because
as
if
you said
it's-
with the other.
Yeah, it might be too firm that if it's too hard to press through your cookie press or your piping bag, you need to just actually just use your
use a
hands
little bit.
in yeah.
Okay, and I
Soften
know
it
there's recipes for biscotti in here, all sorts of things, and those brown butter cookies, yum. Because they sound healthy. I don't know, they've got peanut butter, molasses,
Yes, they're just
oatmeal,
bit
raisins.
of everything. But the
Little
brown
bit
butter
here.
gives it a depth of flavor.
And by brown butter, you mean you brown the butter?
Oh, well, these are the brown sugar base.
Okay,
So these are
brown-
the classics. You know, this is,
Right.
if you've never baked anything in your life, that's where you start, is this brown sugar cookie dough.
Yes.
Because from that one base recipe, you can turn it into chocolate chips, oatmeal raisin, peanut butter, and
Exactly,
molasses.
that is
Yeah.
so true. But the brown butter cookie, is there such a thing?
There is, but that's not that.
That's not
particular-
that.
no.
Okay, so now we're totally confused. Good.
But I
No.
love a good brown butter frosting.
Ooh,
Yeah. Because
Ooh,
you brown the
yum.
butter, cool it, and then you start adding your other ingredients.
sounds delicious.
Nutty and, yeah.
And a
beautiful.
good toffee with some dark chocolate. Yum. So the art of food writing, you're doing this evening from 6:30 to 9 at Cecil Green Park House, UBC. How great. Fundraiser for Kids Safe Writers Room.
And it's a lovely panel discussion. So we'll talk about the inside scoop behind cookbook writing, writing in general, editing, the whole process. It's a great meet and greet opportunity. And of course, there'll be snacks.
Of course there will. This probably won't be left, but we'll see. Thank you.
Thank you,
Nice to
Fanny.
see you again. Anna Olson, back to baking, 200 timeless recipes to enjoy.